The Manninline open for business through till 2 o'clock. Now, you heard the Junior Tynwald and young people's political engagement. In the studio today, we've got Noah Bovenizer and George Ratcliffe, both from Ramsey Grammar School. You were there as reporters, weren't you?
Yeah.
Okay. So, Noah, what did you reckon to it all?
I thought it was quite interesting. I've never sat in on a sitting of Tynwald before, and obviously this wasn't exactly the same, but it was quite interesting to kind of see more of how the political process works on the Isle of Man. I feel like you see a lot of it elsewhere when it's the big news, but on the Isle of Man, it's, unless you're actively seeking it, you don't often see the process. So to actually be there and see the ministers and other MHKs there as well.
Did you have any preformed ideas about what it might be like? Was it?
I've been round the Tynwald chambers before. So I knew kind of the layout, so I kind of had an idea of where everyone sat and people obviously getting up and asking the questions and things like that. But it was interesting to see how they handled as well with the supplementary questions, which obviously they didn't. Some of them were a bit not off the wall, but a bit more out there than maybe they would have been used to, I suspect.
George, had you ever seen Tynwald at that close before?
No, I've never been and seen an actual sitting, but it was a bit of a shock because I didn't expect it to be as active as it was, especially with students.
Would you say you're a political person yourself? Are you interested in politics?
Yeah, I do politics at A level.
Right.
Apart from that, I haven't had much hands-on experience with it.
Is there a difference between studying it at A level in an academic kind of detached way and then seeing how it works in Tynwald?
Yeah, I suppose, because it's sort of like when you're there, you can see exactly how it works, and like what will happen at just spontaneity. But when you do it in a lesson, you don't get that spontaneity factor that you do when you're actually there.
Can I ask why you took politics at A level?
Well, I just like the subject, and everything in the world goes back to politics, and I'd like to learn how it works.
With a view to doing what?
I'd like to go into journalism, so I think politics is quite useful for that.
Right. So do you think journalists can make a difference in the political world?
Yeah, I think they can, because they report the news, obviously, and they report the news.
William King is with us as well. William from Castle Rushen High School, George and Noah from Ramsey Grammar School. You were there as a reporter, weren't you, William, as well?
I was, yes.
Yeah. What did you think to it all?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's one thing listening to a sitting on the radio, but actually being there and being so close to the action is really brilliant.
Now, if you want to call 66 13 68, you can talk to we can talk to anybody if you want, Noah or George or William or me. Sadly, Corenza's not here. Corenza took part. She took the seat for Aaron Michael, and she got the Outstanding Participant Award for the Junior Tynwald. She's not with us today, but interestingly, as far as politics is concerned, I think I'll go to Noah first of all. George was talking about politics being everywhere and everything being connected by politics. And sometimes young people get a bad press. Some people sometimes say young people aren't interested. How interested are young people? I'm going to ask you to speak on behalf of all young people.
I can say for myself, I also take politics at A level, and a lot of my kind of friend group do as well, but not even the people that don't take politics. Often you'll hear in our sixth form common room conversations about, there's the big topics like Brexit or even smaller ones just for the Isle of Man. And obviously we had to come up with the questions for Junior Tynwald, and someone from Ramsey, Jack Smith, he did one of the main debate topics about the drinks culture. So I think it just shows that not everyone, not all adults can see into this kind of where we are just in our common room or we are just with our friends. Not everyone sees that. And I can say from my point of view, I often hear political conversations. I think that just shows that people are interested. Yeah. But then you do sometimes see all this in the news that they're not voting enough, they're not doing this. But it can be very hard, I think, for some people to understand exactly what's going on. Even in the Isle of Man, like I said, sometimes you have to kind of seek out more what's happening in the politics. But that's just, I suppose, the nature of being on a smaller island.
What sort of conversations go on about booze then, about alcohol?
That's not necessarily one that comes up a lot, but
It's not a leading question. It's just every older generation has always misunderstood the younger generation. Every older generation always thinks the younger generation have too much fun, too much money, too much this, too much that, not enough responsibility. And booze, alcohol, the nature of alcohol has changed. Alcohol's a lot cheaper than it's ever been, and it's far more available than it's ever been. Years ago, licensing hours were very restrictive on the Isle of Man. Nowadays, anyone can go into a shop that sells booze and buy booze. So I think the older generation will be interested as to how younger people handle the availability of booze.
Yeah, I can say from my experience, obviously being 17, technically it's not legal, but everyone knows it goes on. I think if someone were to deny that young people were drinking, it would be stupid, for lack of a better word. But yeah, I can say for myself, when you're out either at a party or at someone's house, something like that, I never necessarily see people that bad in terms of handling the alcohol. But I think it's the same at any age, to be honest. There'll be people that can't handle it, that drink too much, and there'll be people that just have a little bit for a social, in a social environment, or just.
But as someone, you're 17 years of age, aren't you?
Yeah.
Are you aware of people with alcohol problems within your peer group?
I wouldn't say so. There's not in terms of explicit problems. As far as I know, I don't know anyone that has major problems with alcohol. There's some people that enjoy it more than others, but
and there always have been,
and there always is. There always is at every age, like I said. But I don't know anyone with a problem. I think that's maybe a bit of a myth, maybe from other people, that young people are just out there drinking all the time. But I know plenty of people who can enjoy a time with their friends at a party or something and not need alcohol or not need a lot of it. It's not, I wouldn't say, in Junior Tynwald we were talking about the drinks culture, and I think there is a bit of a problem there in terms of sometimes it can get a bit too much and people do go a bit wild sometimes when they. Do
you think adults have a drinks culture on the Isle of Man?
Yeah, I think I don't know. I think I think someone said in Junior Tynwald, the whole of Britain kind of has this drinks culture of heavy drinking, and not to stereotype too much, but the whole idea of the football and drinking like that, going to the pub all the time. There's lots of this kind of culture, but yeah, I wouldn't say it's necessarily any one generation, to be honest.
You're nodding there, George. What do you mean? What do you think?
Well, yeah, like Noah said, there is a bit of a stereotype that when Brits go abroad, we do have a bit of a drinking problem. Like on planes, you always hear about people getting drunk on planes before they even get to a destination. But on the Isle of Man, from what I've seen, I don't think it's like that as much. So, yeah.
William, now you're far too young, but what's your thought on it?
Well, I think you could definitely argue that it's not just a problem in the Isle of Man, and this is definitely a worldwide issue. And the Isle of Man may have some of the... I don't know, really. I think it's probably not the biggest problem on the Isle of Man. I certainly don't know anyone with a drinking problem themselves, certainly not in my age group. And yeah, I think, as you say, it's definitely an intergenerational issue.
Okay, one question I want to ask all three of you. Well, a couple of questions. Do you read a daily newspaper, George?
From time to time I'll read one, but not every day.
Which one would you read?
Probably just like the Isle of Man one, the Examiner maybe.
Okay.
From time.
Noah?
In terms of a physical newspaper, there's not one that I read every day, but I read the news all the time. I read the BBC, and I have the Times, the Guardian apps on my phone, so I'll read them.
Okay, William?
I don't read a daily newspaper, but yeah, I'm still intaking the news, and it has been suggested to me by various people, but I just don't think it's how people are consuming their news anymore.
Okay. George, would you ever read a magazine?
Yeah, I probably would. For example, I subscribe to Sports Illustrated and I read that every month when it comes. But apart from that, I don't read any news-related newspapers.
Okay. Noah?
Yeah, I occasionally buy a film magazine called Empire. That's where I'm interested in. Yeah.
Okay. William?
I'm not sure really. No, I think I'm less into magazines. Not really.
Okay. I only say this because one statistics that's touted about the new generation coming through, millennials, is nobody under 40 reads a newspaper. Nobody actually picks up a newspaper, which is bad news for the newspaper industry. Your generation may see the end of newspapers per se, so the thought of actually buying and consuming long-form journalism may be entirely gone. Now, what that's going to mean in the future, who knows? But it's. I think the older generation would like to know how young people get their news, because years ago people used to read a newspaper, sit down with a fag and a cup of tea, and would just read a newspaper all morning long. As you say, you're consuming news, Noah, on websites. Would you visit a newspaper's website or app every day?
Yes, I think me and a lot of other people, which is where some problems can arise with where they get their news from, is social media.
You know where I'm leading, don't you?
Yeah. But for instance, I go on Twitter quite a lot. That's probably my preferred one. And this is kind of who I follow and what companies and some news sites that I follow. But it's news stories will pop up from some American sources, some British, some international. And sometimes I'll click on those articles and they'll link to their website, obviously. But most of the time I would get my news from the apps, which are kind of their websites in a different form. But yeah, I know a lot of people just would go on social media and whatever pops up first, they might click on it, or they might not even click on it. They might just read the headline. So
Noah, obviously you're taking politics. How would an aspiring journalist like yourself, how would you know which news sources are genuine?
Well, mainly just because of what the where it comes from. So if it's from an organisation like the Times or the BBC, it will be more genuine than just one of those generic list articles you get when you're scrolling through Facebook.
10 things you didn't know about.
Yeah, like those sorts of things. When you see them, you know they're not entirely real. Or if you're from the same website, you'll see a headline about just something totally unrelated. Like, did you know so and so does so and so to yourself? If it's from a website like, say, from a website that does list articles, you'll know it won't be as genuine as a website like the BBC. So,
well, you'd hope.
Yeah.
Another problem with the social media is people read the headlines and they might not be so inclined as to actually click on the link and read the full story in total. So that can cause an issue if the headline's out there to get the readers. You might not read directly into it and then get the actual whole idea of the story if you've just gone off the headline and said, oh my gosh, there's so many more prisoners today than there were however many years ago. You haven't actually looked into the actual statistics and they might be measuring it differently or something.
Yeah, people do seem to jump to conclusions from the headline and the headline's like totally unrelated to what's actually in the article.
What struck you most about Junior Tynwald in terms of the questions, George?
I'd say probably just how many supplementary ones there were, because someone would raise a topic, say about the drinks culture, and there'd be quite a lot of supplementary questions about the topic, and it was just amazing to see how many questions came from one relatively narrow topic.
So you'd like to be a journalist, you're taking politics. What sort of TV programmes do you watch?
Well, most days, or for example, I try to watch the news about 10 o'clock, or the BBC News at 10, and sometimes in the morning I'll just put the news on as I'm having my breakfast. But apart from that, probably sports and stuff. What
do you think is the most the hottest topic politically then?
Right now, probably, I'd say maybe Brexit.
It's got to be, hasn't
it? Yeah. Or what's going on in America at the moment. But
well, we've come this far. It's 1:30. We've not mentioned the President of the United States.
No.
I've got three, one 16-year-old and two 17-year-olds. So if you would keep it clean, please. What do you think of President Trump, George?
Well, he's a character, isn't he? Some of his statements are very bold and very brash and harsh. And what he says can sometimes be very controversial.
What do you think of him as a man?
Well, I imagine he's probably quite intelligent, but he seems to act without thinking most of the time. Yeah.
Noah?
To keep it PG, I'm not a fan of the.
Were you a fan
president.
Of President Obama?
Yes. As the problem there is I wasn't necessarily so, being the age that I was when Obama was in power. I was very young when he first came in. I was only like 7 years old. So I don't necessarily know as much about the nitty-gritty of his policies, things like that, as much as I would now, especially being more interested in politics and journalism in the news as I am. So it's hard to directly compare what I think, but from what I've seen and from what I remember, Obama just carried himself in general just a lot better than I'd say Trump does. And it just comes across, it just comes across, especially to people not in America, I think, who kind of just see it from the outside. We don't feel most of the time, we don't feel any of the impacts of at least within their country, what's going on. So it just appears that he's a bit all over the place sometimes, which is not encouraging when you're the younger generation.
William's dying to get in. What do you want to say?
Well, I was just going to say, I was lucky enough in February to visit Trump Tower, and
he just slipped that in, didn't he?
Yeah. Well, anyway, what I was going to say is that whatever you think of the guy and his political alliance and his policies and stuff, he's worked the system well, and he's managed to get himself this great big tower, and he's put himself on top of his country, and somehow he's managed to make the people that are so less fortunate than he is agree with what he's saying. So on purely a PR perspective, I think you've got to have some respect for the guy.
When you're now 17 and 16 years of age, when you're in 50 years' time, when you're old men, you'll say, I remember President Trump when I was a kid, and it'll be interesting to see what... I can look back as a middle-aged man. I remember the day that President Kennedy was shot, and I knew nothing about President Kennedy, but he looked like an all-right sort of bloke. And I think that's probably what you're saying about Obama, in that he had that general aura of being legitimate, if you see what I mean. I think a lot now, but with more social media, with everyone's more connected, you see that everyone in politics a lot more in the UK, in the US, everywhere. You see actually them in action a lot of the time. Do you think it's important? Do you think it's imperative that all politicians are on social media?
I would say if they want an actual good impact within reason, it's best for them to be on social media, especially for younger people, but also even just slightly older than me or so, even in like the 30s and 40s. I know plenty of people like my parents' friends or just other adults that I know that are on social media a lot. It's not just the young people as some might assume. So if they actually want to connect with the people that they're governing, being on social media for me is probably one of the best ways for them to do that.
George?
Yeah, I think the fact that Trump is always on Twitter tweeting something about...
He's never off it, is he?
No, he's not. But whenever he is on it, all the time, he's always tweeting something about what he's done. I think that's quite good because it does gather another audience for the people, so people can see what he's doing in America.
Whatever anybody says about the President of the United States, he's revolutionised it. And getting to Twitter with the millions of followers he has, he bypasses, and again, I want to ask you about all three of you, I suppose. He bypasses what he calls fake news. And never has there been a leader of the Western world, the free world, who's ever criticised openly the media. What do you think about that, George?
He is brave for doing it, but sometimes some articles he's labelled as fake news just quite clearly aren't, but it's quite good that he is.
Why do you think that's resonated, though? Why do you think his followers, the people who follow Donald Trump, go along with that? They believe that?
I think he's just a very influential man, and he knows how to manipulate people, and he can gauge what he wants to hear, and he can make people think what he wants to think.
Well, he's taking out the middleman, isn't he? He's not going to the newspapers or the broadcasting corporations. He's going directly to the people, and it could be argued that means that the people are getting a more well-rounded view of the whole system, because you could say that if you're reading a newspaper, you're reading what, I don't know, Rupert Murdoch, whoever, you're reading what they want you to read about the subject. And for Trump to actually go out there and put it out to the people he's doing what he's doing.
Okay, right. Well, just going to take a quick break. Just some quick comments I want to go through. I've been drinking for 40 years. The biggest addiction take this. The biggest addiction on this island for young people is mobile phones. I hope some of the young Tynwald people don't injure themselves tripping over the Tynwald carpet. There's all kinds of files swept under there, I see. Do our young people really think the Isle of Man government demonstrates it's accountable to the Manx people? We'll come back on that. One of your guests mentioned he'd heard but not seen proceedings in Tynwald. Do you think, ask your guests whether they think Tynwald proceedings should be televised rather than just on the radio? And here's one that we were talking about before, and this concerns, let's see, it'd be interesting to know if any of your chaps have ever talked about the notion of condoms in schools. I don't know where this came from. I'm of the opinion that it's quite healthy and a safe choice for teenagers. They talk about it enough, says Sarah. Thank you for that. Anything other points you want to put, you call 66 13 68, or you can text 16677 or email studio@manxradio.com.